Hezbollah Secretary General warns of an existential threat facing the Middle East and calls for unity against Islamic State militants. Iraq's new premier, Haider al-Abadi, urges his countrymen to unite after Nouri al-Maliki relinquished his post. Thousands of people from Iraq's Yazidi religious minority seek refuge in neighboring countries as fighting rages between militants and security forces. And Palestinians accuse Israeli forces of a cross-border shooting in violation of the Gaza truce. Hello and welcome. This is AEE World News with me, Sergeant Pereradovic. While commemorating the 8th anniversary of Hezbollah's victory over the Israelis, the resistance group's Secretary General Said Hassan Nasrallah revealed that the 2006 war was designed to eliminate the resistance in Lebanon and the wider Middle East.
It turned out that the July assault was part of a plan that was aimed at ending and exterminating the resistance in Lebanon, not just disarming it. And after ending the resistance and based on reports that Syria provided it with weapons, Israelis would continue their plan by attacking Syria and creating a new regime, allied with the US. The third part of this plan was attacking the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, and this was to be achieved before the end of 2006. The factors of this plan include direct American occupation, and secondly attacking Syria and ending the resistance in Palestine. We have to believe that there is a real existential danger threatening us all, and it is not a joke. And we must be aware of this threat's potentials. Those who say nothing is happening are completely detached from reality.
Well, Said Nasrallah also urged all the people in the region to unite against the threat of the so-called Islamic State militant group, adding that the US is the group's main beneficiary.
I call on every Lebanese, Palestinian, Iraqi, Syrian and Gulf national to leave sectarian intolerance behind and think if this phenomenon is a threat against Shiites only. No one should regard this battle as a sectarian one. It is a takfiri war against anyone who opposed it. It is a danger threatening everyone. The so-called ISIL is a group that has now taken control of large geographical areas in Syria and Iraq, and has taken control of resource fields and main water dams. It has large quantities of weapons and ammunition and is selling oil. It also includes many foreign fighters whose arrival here has been facilitated. The massacres that have been committed harmed Sunnis primarily, and ISIL did not spare anyone in Iraq, like Kurds, Yazidis, Shiites, Christians and Turkmen. This example has nothing to do with Islam. What I know is that Americans have turned a blind eye and expanded their vision to benefit from this phenomenon.
All right, let's get some expert analysis on what some of this means, and for that I'm joined now by Dr. Kamel Wazni. Doctor, it seems like the most important part of that speech is Said Hassan's warning concerning the threat from Islamic State militants.
Obviously, the message was very clear that there's a clear threat, an imminent threat from this group, but nothing is far from actually fighting them and finish them if everybody take responsibility. And that's the message that he was sending to everybody, that everybody have to work and coordinate and work together to make sure this terrorist organization does not see the life. Obviously, the tactic that used by this terrorist organization by spreading fear, by the way they go about executing their terrorist activity and murdering people, I think this is a message where I think from a fighter who defeated the Israeli, who defeated the West, and he said he can take on this group, but there should be some work from the Lebanese, from the Syrian, from the Iraqi to make sure there will be an end for this terrorist organization. And he said we cannot sit without doing anything about them, otherwise we all can be in jeopardy.
Yeah, and how important is that point in specific, Doctor? The fact that Said Hassan said that this group can be defeated.
Oh, it's very important because their tactic, their war tactic, that they wanted everybody to be scared of them, and they've been very successful in certain part of the region in their fighting, especially in Mosul, when we've seen a lot of these army just left and run away, and in certain area in Syria, the same thing happened. I think that you have to put a message to them that they're not scary as they try to actually to project. Those terrorist organization number on the thousand of people can be put an end to them. But I think the Muslim world, the Christian, the international community have to come together to put an end for this terrorist organization. We saw that the UN just a few minutes ago, they voted against sanction against these people who trying to actually smuggle their oil and generate cash for themselves, to enrich themselves and to keep themselves alive. Well, he mentioned that the support that been given from some Arab country, Gulf Arab country, and unfortunately from the West, which been saying for a very long time they're against terrorism, but obviously this is not the case.
Yeah, and what about the American role in all of this, Doctor? Syed Hassan also talked about how the Americans create, whether directly or indirectly, these conflicts in the Middle East, and then they fly in as the saviors.
Obviously, this is the statement that was echoed by him, was echoed by other member of the United States Congress. If you look at Senator Randy Paul, he actually said the same thing, that ISIS was indirectly built by the American in Syria and spread into Iraq. And this is the message was actually echoed by the former Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton, when she blamed the Obama administration, her ex-boss, for actually creating ISIS, where she was blamed for saying we gave support to these terrorist organizations, which they have during the Reagan administration. So now the American actually did not do anything when it came to when the ISIS Islamic State attack Mosul. They came to the rescue when it had their interest in Erbil, where they said there's American interests over there, and they came to the rescue. But when the Christians and other people were massacred, did not do or lift a hand. I think the American they cannot change that attitude very soon, and they have already, in my estimate, started to change their attitude, because they think a lot of these Islamists came from Western country, and maybe they can be next on the target. So the sentiment with the Obama administration was, in a way, was helping this group, and with some senior administration and the Senate, where they were helping this group to fight in Syria. Now we hear those same people said we have to bomb them in Syria. So it's a change of attitude, but we have to wait and see. But you don't have to count on the United States. I think these countries, they have to work together and make sure they coordinate their work, and they have to put pressure on these Gulf countries to make sure no funding will be allowed for these terrorist organizations. And I think this is going to happen. I think within 6 months, we're going to see a major degrading for this terrorist organization throughout the Middle East, and you're going to see their rhetoric going to go down in defeat.
How real or how serious do you think the danger is, or how bad are things going to get in the coming months or years? Because Saeed Nasrallah also talked about the fact that for those people who are denying the fact that there is a very dangerous trend unfolding in Middle East, he said they're detached from reality. So what sort of dangers are we looking at here?
Oh, I think at this point everybody, they're saying there's an imminent threat. I've been reading all the analysts in the United States, everybody in the House and the Senate, all of a sudden they got a shock of reality. Some even people in the Middle East, even from Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden, after being sitting on the side and supporting what they're supposed to be the Syrian their peoples in Syria to actually cause instability. Now they feel the threat of these terrorist organizations. And I think Turkey, on the other hand, there is a lot of pressure on Turkey and Qatar to cut funding for these terrorist organizations. And to my estimate, there is something being done on the ground to actually corner these terrorist organizations. It seems that maybe today with that UN resolution, you're going to see more accountability and cutting of funds for these terrorist organizations. And probably with the new appointment for designated appointment for the Prime Minister of Iraq, this is going to be the beginning of the end for these terrorist organizations. We're going to see a lot of good things on the ground, whether it's in Syria or in Iraq or anywhere in the world, fighting these elements. They're not large when you look at them, but the way they carry their terror campaign, they look like they're like controlling everything. But eventually, as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said, they can be defeated, and I'm sure they will be defeated.
Political analyst Dr. Kamil Wazni, always good to get your thoughts on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, Iraq's Haider al-Abadi has issued his first statement since he was cleared for the post of Prime Minister, urging his countrymen to unite in the face of dangerous challenges. Abadi's comments were posted on his Facebook page, where he said, "Our path ahead is not easy. The challenges that we face are dangerous, but we can overcome it with our unity, cooperation, and by putting our hands together. I will not offer you unrealistic promises, but I promise you that I will do my best to serve our people and our nation and to spend my life in defending them."
In a late-night televised address, two-term Premier Noor al-Maliki dropped his bid to stay in power.
In order to facilitate the political process and the formation of the new government and to preserve the country's higher interests, I announce before you today the withdrawal of my candidacy in favor of brother Dr. Haider al-Abadi. I support anyone who fulfills their responsibility and keeps the trust in a national, honorable and courageous way, one who defends the oppressed, sectarianism and attempts to divide Iraq, and preserves Iraq unity, independence and sovereignty.
Maliki's Dawa party had initially rejected new Iraqi President Fuad Massoum's call on Haider al-Abadi, the former deputy parliament speaker, to form a new government. However, after asking Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali as-Sistani's opinion on the matter, the party announced its decision to endorse Abadi. Iraq's top Shia clerk Grand Ayatollah Sayyid as-Sistani was quick to welcome Maliki's decision and called on political blocs to cooperate with Prime Minister Abadi to form a new government.
Without a doubt, the completion of the process to fill the 3 presidential posts and the regional and international welcome is a rare and positive opportunity to solve all Iraq's problems, especially political and security ones. We call on all the political blocs of the parliament to meet their historic responsibility and cooperate with the Prime Minister to form an efficient and strong government, which has a clear program to solve past mistakes and give rights to all the Iraqi people.
The international community also saluted Maliki's relinquishing of power. Iraq's neighbor Iran praised al-Maliki, with Hussein Abdullahian, Iran's deputy foreign minister, saying that over the past 8 years, Maliki made a great deal of effort to establish a united, secure, developed and free Iraq. While in the streets of the capital Baghdad, reaction to Maliki giving up his post were mixed.
We want everyone to work together in the united effort to achieve a better future for Iraq. It's a good and satisfying move, which Maliki should have taken right from the start, because his term of office has ended. It's a normal thing in the civilized and advanced countries of the world. We have to build this country, because it's our country.
The decision was prompted by internal and external interventions, and this will usher in the start of what is called a compromised democracy. This will have a negative impact in the future and will stop people from taking part in elections. Secondly, Mr. Maliki has achieved many things, including getting Iraq out of the UN Chapter 7, ending the presence of foreign troops in Iraq, clearing Iraq debts, getting Iraq connected again to international organizations after long years of isolation and building institutions.
Al-Maliki has been struggling for months to stay for a third four-year term as Prime Minister of the country after the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003. Now, with almost unanimous approval for Prime Minister-designate Haider al-Abadi, only time will tell whether the deteriorating security situation will change for the better.
Meanwhile, Iraq's Sunni tribal leaders have also announced that they are willing to join the new administration in Baghdad if certain conditions are met. The group also added that its community is ready to join the fight against Islamic State militants.
ISIL has come under a foreign agenda. We before God pledge that we will continue to fight against ISIL or any other form of terrorism. We are prepared to fully cooperate with the upcoming government, yet on one condition, that the rights of the Sunnis are assured and guaranteed. Leave ISIL to us. We will fight them once you restore our rights and provide sufficient assurances. Once our own guards are formed, provided with arms through proper channels with the government, otherwise we will go back to square one facing the same tragedies.
Well, Hanan El-Rida gives us a look now at the most important events that shaped Iraq's political arena during outgoing Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's 8 years in power.
Outgoing Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki came to power in 2006, a tumultuous time for Iraq. An attack on a Shia shrine in Samarra kindled a flame of sectarian violence, killing thousands of people. This fire wasn't put out until April 22nd of the same year, when al-Maliki formed a new government, ending months of stalemate at the request of then President Jalal Talbani. Under the Shia Muslim who served as Prime Minister for 8 years, a national unity cabinet was sworn in after former despot Saddam Hussein's downfall. In 2010, parliamentary elections unleashed a political crisis between Shias and Sunnis, leading to a deal which stated that the President of Iraq would be a Kurd, the Prime Minister a Shia, and the Speaker of Parliament a Sunni. In the same year, Maliki was reappointed as head of the government. Maliki's rule also witnessed the complete U.S. withdrawal from Iraq, which marked an end to nearly 9 years of occupation in December of 2011. In 2012, anti-government protests were held in the province of Anbar, demanding the ouster of Maliki. However, clashes soon broke out between militants and security forces, leaving more than 200 people dead. At the beginning of 2014, Baghdad lost control of Fallujah and parts of Ramadi and Anbar province to al-Qaeda-linked militants. Later in the year, Maliki's State of Law coalition won the most seats in the country's general elections. In an unexpected turn of events, the so-called Islamic State group seized Iraq's second biggest city, Mosul, as part of an expansion bid. On August 11th, President Fuad Massoum nominated Haider al-Abadi as new prime minister. Maliki refused to accept what he called an unconstitutional bid, but eventually stepped down.
While staying in Iraq, where militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State blew up a Shia mosque in the flashpoint town of Jalaulah in Diyala province. This after Iraqi fighter jets launched attacks against militant positions in that same town. Now, dozens of Islamic State militants were reportedly killed during those strikes, which come days after the terrorist group overtook the area following clashes with Kurdish forces. For their part, EU ministers agreed at an emergency meeting in Brussels to back the arming of Kurdish Peshmerga forces fighting the IS.
We today came to a joint decision which shows that the European Union welcomes the readiness of individual countries to positively answer requests for support from the Kurdish security forces.
Well, as you heard earlier, the UN Security Council has unanimously adopted a resolution aimed at weakening Islamic State militants in both Iraq and Syria. Now, the resolution includes measures to choke off funding and the flow of foreign fighters. The British drafted document would also place 6 Islamist leaders from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other nations on the al-Qaeda sanctions list, which provides a travel ban and asset freezes.
The draft resolution received 15 votes in favour. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2170. We are grateful for the strong support from Council members to this initiative and for the clear sense of unity which enabled this strong Chapter 7 resolution to be agreed so quickly. Today, this Council has sent a clear political message to ISIL, ANF, and other AQ-inspired terrorists and has taken important practical steps to combat the threat they pose.
Hani Ali is the director of the Iraqi Center for Integration and Cohesion, and he joins me now for more on the developments in Iraq over the past 24 hours. Mr. Ali, let's begin with the Sunni leaders in Iraq. They're pledging their willingness, if you will, to work with the central government in Baghdad. But that cooperation comes with strings attached, doesn't it?
It is to the best interest of all Iraqis now to understand that there is an existential threat, as they call it, to Iraq and to every Iraqi, no matter what their identity is, whether they're Shia, Sunni or Kurd or even other minorities, as we have seen. So ISIS and terrorism as a whole greatly endangers the existence of all these communities together. It is in their interest to cooperate with the new Prime Minister designate, who at the end of the day, it was to the in line with their request to change Prime Minister Maliki. Prime Minister Maliki, as you mentioned in your report, did have the largest and does have the largest bloc. He decided to step down for various reasons, but at the end of the day, that's in line with the request that the Sunnis and the Kurds have requested before. So really, what is expected from them is that they would cooperate fully and strongly support the new Prime Minister designate, Haidar al-Abadi.
Do you think Haidar al-Abadi is the right man for the job? Is he the right man to bridge the divide between these different communities and, of course, the different political factions?
Well, he has some interesting qualities. Unlike Maliki, who comes from a tribal background, Haidar al-Abadi comes from a background where his father is a surgeon. He has studied PhD in Manchester University, and he's more acquainted with the Western, hopefully, with the Western politics and Western style. The key thing to remember here is what, and to rephrase what Nikolai Mladinov, the UN envoy, said in Iraq, that Maliki has shown some statesmanship and commitment to democratic values. And really, it's not only Maliki, because we had Jafari before him who had shown a very similar position. And basically what we're saying is that over 10 years, the Shia of Iraq have proven to be the most capable of keeping a peaceful, democratic, honorable, dignified, strong, but equally straightforward transition of power, something that many of the regional countries have not managed to achieve. Haidar al-Abadi has some good characteristics. He speaks English, for example. He lived in the UK. He had a business in the UK in communications. He was a minister of communication. If you like, Maliki grew into his job during these 8 years, while Haidar al-Abadi since 2006 have already been holding some ministerial and government positions. So you would expect he would come into this position with more experience than when Maliki came into this position.
Do you think those political developments in Baghdad, the successes, if you will, resolving the political impasse, will translate into military successes against these so-called Islamic State militants?
It's a huge boost of morale for all Iraqis, including the security forces. We have now done something that was seen almost impossible to be done. They've all adhered to the constitutional timelines in accordance with Ayatollah Sistani's recommendations, of course, that all constitution timelines must be adhered to, and that's exactly what has happened. We're waiting for Haidar al-Abadi to complete his cabinet within the 30 days of constitutional timeline. That's a complete strength and elevation of morale for all Iraqis. There's a big relief now that Maliki has shown, as we said, some statesmanship, and he has decided to step down. He could have, of course, carried on his approach of being potentially towards more escalation, but he didn't do that. Now the Shia bloc are very strongly united and they're showing a strong force. They're all backing each other. The Sunnis came up with a candidate, and hopefully it would be backed up by the Sunnis, Salim al-Juburi, who's now the Speaker of the Parliament. The Kurds hopefully continue to support Ma'soom, and all Iraqis, Sunnis, Shia, Kurd, whoever their background, or Turkmen, or Yazidi, or Christian, they should now focus on cooperating and supporting Haidar al-Abadi as the new Prime Minister of Iraq, to ensure that all these dangers that Iraq is facing today is annulled. And of course we expect exactly the same thing from the international community. So it's good that your report talked about the Security Council resolution. What is more important is the backing and the support of the international community, including the US and the UK, the support that they can give to Haidar al-Abadi in his new role.
How much, though, does that UN Security Council resolution, Mr. Ali, really change on the ground? Do you think that it will have a crippling effect against these militants?
The new Security Council didn't tell us much, really. We knew that the funding came from Saudi and Qatar donors and potentially Kuwait donors as well. If we are to be optimistic about the security resolution, it's a step towards being more proactive from the international community to combat ISIS. At the end of the day, this is a recognition from the international community to say that what ISIS is, and that's what we have been saying for 2 months now. It's interesting that the international community has only awakened now to understand that ISIS is a threat not only to Iraq or to Syria, it's a threat to the, to the human race, as it were. And it is a threat to the UK as much as it is a threat to Iraq. It is a threat to the US as much as it is a threat to all the regional countries. So it's a step towards recognizing the threat of ISIS. Hopefully it's one step, but there would be many more who would continue this approach of directly counteracting, confining, constraining the activities, the funding, the weapons or the arms that are getting to ISIS. However, there's one thing which is interesting, that ISIS have now unfortunately been let to have enough free time for them to now self-fund themselves through selling oil or through doing some, ensuring that they do some trades in the region. So they're also self-funding. So from a financial perspective, it will do very little, but from a from a world view of ISIS perspective, hopefully that would be a step towards the right direction of taking a much more robust, strong and unified step or position from the international community towards these terrorist organizations, specifically ISIS.
Director of the Iraqi Center for Integration and Cohesion, Hani Ali, thanks very much for speaking to Al Ittijah. Well, tens of thousands of refugees from Iraq's Yazidi minority who have been forced to flee their homes are pouring into neighboring Syria. This as the international community steps up its humanitarian efforts for those still besieged by Islamic State militants on Mount Shinjar.
1 year ago, Syrians fleeing violence in their country were crossing this same border into Iraq. Today, Iraqi minorities are heading in the other direction. These men, women and children of the Yazidi minority group have just entered neighboring Syria, seeking refuge from militants of the so-called Islamic State.
Rising numbers of displaced people coming from Sinjar districts and Sinjar mountains have been crossing this pontoon behind me over the last 48 hours. According to the government of Kurdistan and United Nations, more than 25,000 over the last 2-3 days have sought refuge and asylum in the Houk province, which is just ahead. We are representing here the United Nations humanitarian agencies, UNICEF, WHO, WFP and UNHCR, and the collective effort to support displacement from Sinjar and other parts of the Nineveh Plains.
Moving further north across Syria, and the same story is repeated at the Nuris camp in Hasaka province. Yazidi refugees have joined the nearly 1,000 Iraqi families who have taken refuge in the Syrian province despite the raging civil war in the country. Improved security had allowed large numbers of Yazidis to escape Mount Sinjar, but thousands remain trapped and in need of help. For its part, Germany's armed forces on Friday began sending aid supplies to northern Iraq. The first plane set off for Erbil in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq, carrying medicines, food and blankets, with further aid flights planned for the day.
Of course, this is just the beginning, and we're working hard on sending further aid if necessary. We're also working on the question of whether equipment is needed, protective helmets and vests.
The UK has also released footage of aid drops by the Royal Air Force Hercules aircraft over Mount Sinjar. Still, however, the journey across the mountains is difficult, and IS militants show no sign of retreat, which means it could be a long time before those who do survive the siege return home.
Well, it's women belonging to Iraq's minority groups that are paying the high price as a result of the recent militant expansion across northwestern parts of the country. According to a report, hundreds of Iraqi women belonging to the Yazidi minority were auctioned off as sex slaves.
This is modern-day slavery at its worst. Held as domestic slaves, forced to marry Islamic State militants, or sold to traffickers. That's the horrific fate Iraq's women are faced with in parts of the country. Here in the northern Iraqi province of Mosul, the price of women ranges from as little as $150 to $3,000. Intelligence reports have revealed that 700 women belonging to the Yazidi minority have been auctioned off this week to work in brothels across the Middle East. 2 schools in Tel Afar and Mosul are being used as makeshift prisons for women, where they face death or life in captivity, rape, and enduring humiliation. Every woman living in areas under the control of the notorious Islamic State militant group has to undergo female genital mutilation. Those considered lucky end up crossing into Syria, Turkey, or Iraq's Kurdish region as their relatives face eventual extermination. As militants continue to pose a threat in areas across Iraq, the persecution of Christian, Turkmen, and Yazidi women shows no sign of ending.
You're with AEE TV World News, still to come on tonight's program. Tension mounts on the Ukraine-Russia border as Kiev claims its forces engaged Russian troops. Welcome back. Here are the top stories that we're following for you this hour on AEE TV. Hezbollah Secretary General warns of an existential threat facing the Middle East and calls for unity against Islamic State militants. Iraq's new Premier Haider al-Abadi urges his countrymen to unite after Nouri al-Maliki relinquished his post. Thousands of people from Iraq's Yazidi religious minority seek refuge in neighboring countries as fighting rages between militants and security forces. And Palestinians accuse Israeli forces of a cross-border shooting in violation of the Gaza truce. Well, thousands of Israelis have rallied in Tel Aviv to urge the resumption of Zionist attacks against the Gaza Strip. Take a look at these photographs. These are Israeli settlers calling for occupation forces to restart the bloody offensive against Palestinians living in Gaza. Well, this is Palestinians accused Israeli forces of violating that Gaza truce following a cross-border shooting. The Interior Ministry in the Gaza Strip announced that Israeli troops shot at houses east of the town of Khan Yunis. Now, that 5-day truce got off to a rocky start, with Israeli occupation forces launching an air raid early on Thursday. There were no reported casualties in any of those incidents. Meanwhile, the Palestinian resistance groups have indicated that significant progress has been made towards ending the Israeli blockade of the besieged enclave, expanding the fishing zone and allowing imports of construction materials to enter the coastal enclave. The Palestinian and Israeli delegations are expected to return to Cairo on Saturday to resume indirect negotiations. Let's get the latest from Gaza now with our correspondent there, Balsam El-Atrash. Balsam, let's talk about these reports of cross-border shootings from the Israeli side. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, true. There was a breach by the Israeli side to the 122 and 120-hour ceasefire that had been agreed upon 2 days ago. Today, the Israeli occupation forces near the border fired shots against the farmers who were actually returning back to their farms and agricultural lands in order for them to check on them. And the Israeli occupation forces then fired some shots against them. That incident led to no injuries, thank God, among Palestinians. Also, there were several reports from the Palestinian side saying that there was some air raids today in the northern area of Gaza Strip. No party or no Palestinian faction confirmed this, neither did the Palestinian Ministry of Health or the Civil Defense Ministry as well. They did not confirm that there was air raids, although eyewitnesses in the area said that the Israeli occupation forces warplanes did carry out some air raids on the northern area of the Gaza Strip. Other than these two incidents in the past 2 days, no other breaches to the 120-hour ceasefire had been carried out by both parts, Palestinian and Israeli occupation side.
And what about life in Gaza at the moment, Balsam? This 5-day truce now taking effect following another 72-hour truce. Are things at least starting to return to normal in some ways?
Well, actually, we can say that it's beginning to return back to normal a little bit for the Palestinians. Actually, it was a rough 35 days that had passed by, and the Palestinians needed a break or some time for them to recover or maybe just try to return back to their normal life. Although this time actually is the time when the severeness and the depthness of this problem appears, especially with the humanitarian crisis and the crisis inside the hospitals, the UN shelters as well. Today there were reports released that Ebola virus had spreaded among children and women in schools and UN shelters. Also, hospitals reported that some of the people wounded have died due to the fact that they are not capable of treating them and that they were not allowed to travel abroad for treatment. Also, with the power crisis, the water crisis, the health crisis crisis in general in terms of the clean atmosphere and a clean environment for the people inside the hospital. The situation is devastating, and there is a crisis ongoing. Doctors also said that a spread of diseases is more likely during this time, since also resources for daily life activities also is a shortage. Food among people inside the UN school there's lack in food, which led also to the malnutrition of these people, and therefore they need to access some hospitals for treatment, but the hospitals, unfortunately, situation in there is a little bit rough. They are trying to manage it with what they can, but still they are in desperate need for more medical supplies and more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. But other than that, the Palestinian public in general are trying to cope with the situation, trying to as I mentioned, to return back to their daily life, but it's a little bit difficult.
Balsa Belatras there with the latest coming to us from Gaza. Thanks very much, Balsa. Well, that Israeli aggression against Gaza has caused damage not only to buildings, but also to the minds of children who were traumatized during this offensive. Now, as Palestinians are picking up the pieces in the silence of this 5-day truce, many are hoping that negotiations between the warring sides will bring peace to the besieged enclave.
The damage done to Gaza by the recent Israeli offensive is visible not only among the rubble of destroyed homes or wounded civilians. The harm can be seen on children's faces and heard in their voices.
I see our destroyed house and I start screaming when I'm dreaming. Then my mother wakes me up and says, "Don't scream, don't worry."
Experts in Gaza say that children who have lost their parents or saw their parents killed before their eyes or even subjected to the impact of Israeli airstrikes have been psychologically traumatized.
Children, they are suffering from sleep disturbances. It's not easy for them to fall asleep, to go to sleep alone. A lot of them, they are start to suffer from nightmares, night terrors. They are clinging to their parents. They cannot stay without being all the time beside their parents.
They may have been killed, injured and left homeless, but their spirits haven't been razed to the ground. These Gazans performed Friday prayer at a mosque that was targeted by the Israelis to show that they will bow to no one but God.
We came here to perform Friday prayers even though the mosque has been destroyed for no reason. We will continue praying and rebuilding what has been destroyed.
Most Gazans need relief agencies to get back on their feet. Having lost most of their possessions, displaced Palestinians have been offered help by the UN. UNRWA workers are distributing basic commodities such as food supplies to prevent a humanitarian crisis. As many are trying to rebuild their lives from the rubble, Gazans are hoping that negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians will bring about a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire.
Ceasefire would be good for everyone, but I don't think there is one now, because we live on the border area that is constantly under threat, and we cannot trust the Israelis, who are constantly targeting homes along with residents. They claim these homes have rockets and tunnels, but it's all a lie. There's nothing there.
Now, as life seems to have returned to Gaza, it remains to be seen whether the negotiations in Egypt will help keep calm in the enclave or bring back the smell of the death to the Strip.
All right, staying in occupied Palestine, where fierce clashes have broken out between Israeli occupation forces and Palestinian protesters during pro-Gaza rallies. Mass demonstrations were staged across the West Bank on Friday, which was dubbed the Day of Rage. Cities such as Beit Laham and Al-Khalil witnessed violent skirmishes after Israeli troops fired tear gas at angry protesters. All right, moving on to some other news now. And humanitarian aid coming from Russia was put on hold as dozens of convoys waited to be inspected by Ukrainian border guards. This as Kiev intensified its so-called anti-terrorist operation in the east, with Kiev claiming its forces engaged Russian troops at the Ukraine-Russia border.
Dozens of heavy Russian military vehicles massed near the border with Ukraine, as if getting ready for a battle. However, this army gathered while Ukrainian border guards crossed the frontier to inspect a huge Russian aid convoy.
A team of customs officials and border guards are right now, Ukrainian border guards and custom officers are right now in Russia, starting to have a look at the convoy in the city of Kamens-Shaktinsky, where it is.
Some 280 trucks stopped in open fields about 20 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Tensions already high over fears Moscow could use its humanitarian mission as a Trojan horse to help pro-Russian separatists. Kiev has insisted that its forces check the convoy, thus delaying the delivery. This as the Ukrainian military claimed that it had destroyed part of a Russian military convoy, which crossed onto its territory in an alleged incursion.
A convoy of the Russian army vehicles entered Ukraine last night through Izvarim border, crossing which at present is not controlled by Ukrainian border guards from the town of Donetsk in the Russian Federation.
The Russian Defense Ministry, for its part, denied the claim. But for the people in the east, the help could not come soon enough. The Ukrainian military has reportedly shelled their city with internationally prohibited phosphorus incendiaries. Citizens of Donetsk have recorded multiple videos of white glowing particles raining on residential quarters. On Thursday night, people in the Lenin district of the city of Donetsk saw a flow of white fire pouring down from the dark sky, alongside the now familiar sound of bombing. Further scenes of devastation are emerging from across the city, with many buildings burned out or riddled with shell holes. At least 74 people, including children, have been killed in the city in the last 3 days. According to the statistics of the Donetsk People's Republic, at least 839 people have died in these attacks over the last 3 months.
At least 22 people were killed when a car exploded in front of a mosque in Syria's Deraa province. The Britain-based Observatory for Human Rights said the death toll in the militant-controlled town of Namar was likely to rise because of the high number of those seriously injured. The bombing is likely to be the result of ongoing militant infighting, which has claimed thousands of lives in recent months. Well, following a months-long battle against militant groups, the Syrian army has regained control of Mleha, a town on the outskirts of the capital, Damascus.
This is Mleha, deserted, its streets reduced to rubble, its power cables hanging from gutted buildings, and its shops and homes destroyed. After months of fighting with foreign-backed militant groups, the Syrian army has recaptured the strategic town. Syrian troops now say that with Mleha in their hands, they can regain control of eastern Ghouta, an important militant stronghold just outside Damascus, which has long been in their sights.
The town of Mleha is considered a doorway to eastern Ghouta city. It is a base for them to launch attacks against innocent civilians. We were able to cleanse the area from militants to prevent them from entering the capital, Damascus.
Before the Syrian crisis erupted more than 3 years ago, the town was home to 25,000 people, but was later deserted after militant groups launched an offensive against the civilian population. Reconstruction has already begun in some parts of the destroyed town, and maybe Mleha's residents will be able to return back home. For the time being, at least, these Syrian soldiers will be celebrating their long-sought victory.
Well, those are all the stories we have for you on this edition of Al Ittijah World News. Before we go, here's a recap of our top headlines. Hezbollah's Secretary General warns of an existential threat facing the Middle East and calls for unity against Islamic State militants. Iraq's new premier Haider al-Abadi urges his countrymen to unite after Nouri al-Maliki relinquished his post. Thousands of people from Iraq's Yazidi religious community seek refuge in neighboring countries as fighting rages between militants and security forces. And Palestinians accuse Israeli forces of a cross-border shooting in violation of the Gaza truce. That's it for me and the Al Ittijah News team. Thank you for watching.